Shoes. All of our shoes were starting to take over the entryway to our house, so I wanted to build something to keep them organised and tidy. I also wanted to match it to the other furniture I'd built for the entryway, like the coat rack, mirror and side table that you see here. So I went into SketchUp and started putting some ideas down. This is just a really basic plan of what I wanted to build, keep into that same kind of industrial style. I've got this live edge ash slab that I'm going to use for the top of the shoe rack, and a load of steel that I'm going to use to build the frame and the shelves. I'm going to start off by cutting this piece of ash down to size. That will give me some idea of how big I need to build the base. Yeah, I've 3D modelled it, but that's just to give me a rough idea. I like to kind of work out as I go along. But the first job is to remove all of this bark. I'm starting off with a chisel and a mallet just to remove the big chunks of bark, and then moving on to an angle grinder with a flat disc on it just to remove anything that was left over. I'll neaten all this up with a sander later. This is just to get the bulk of the material off. Once I'd finished removing all the bark, I used my combination square to draw a line 260mm from the edge to use as a guide to set up my track saw to get a nice straight cut. So first of all, I'm doing a couple of things wrong here. First one being I haven't got my dust collector on, so that's why sawdust is flying everywhere. And secondly, I'm trying to do the cut in one pass here, which has resulted in the blade binding, and as you can see here, I'm having to rip it out of the wood. Now I turned the dust collector on before attempting this next cut, but I plunged straight down, which causes the saw to kick back and nearly cut me. What I should have done in this situation is take multiple shallow passes, which would result in the wood being cut and not my power cable. Having another look here, you can see that the saw just kicks straight back, jumping off the track, and pulls the power cord into the blade. It is unplugged now. I'm going to have to fix this power cable before I can carry on. I'll do that off camera. I'm not an electrician, so I don't want to give anyone any ideas in case I do this wrong, but yeah, that was pretty scary. Learn for next time, I guess. So I've cut off the section of cable that the saw decided to have for lunch. Reconnected the plug, rewired everything. So I guess it's time to test to see if I fixed it. Fingers crossed. Let's carry on. I did think about cutting that last bit from the video, but I thought it was important to leave mistakes in there, and if anyone watching can avoid making that mistake in the future, then I'm happy with that. So as you see there, I just finished the cut in 3 shallower passes, as I should have done in the first place, and then moving on to cutting the piece of wood down to size on my Mitre saw. This saw doesn't quite have the cutting capacity to go all the way through this piece of wood, so I'm getting as much done as I can with the saw and then moving on to my flush cut saw by hand just to finish it off. So that's all we're going to do on the wooden top for now, and we're going to move on to making the steel base. What I've got here is some 50mm by 3mm flat bar, and we're going to start cutting it down to make the leg assemblies. There's going to be 2 of these pieces that are going to act as the support pieces that bolt onto the wooden top, and then I've got some 50 by 25mm rectangular box section with 3mm walls that are going to act as the legs. I'm using some of my welding magnets to line up the first leg I cut to make sure that all the other legs are the same size. This just ensures that if the first leg that I cut was the wrong size, then all the legs will match it. Yeah, they'll all be the wrong size, but they'll all be the same size. I'm just changing the position of the fence on the saw now, as I need to cut some 45-degree angles to start making the frames for the actual shoe racks themselves. For this, I'm using some 25mm by 25mm angle steel. I believe the walls are 3mm thick. Got a load more of these to cut, so let's skip forward a little bit. At this point I was feeling pretty happy with myself, thinking that I'd cut all the steel I'd need for the project, but I really didn't know what was coming up. So yeah, there's a lot more steel cutting coming up. As a load of the metal is cut now, we're going to start welding the frames together that are going to act as the racks. I'm just going to start this off by saying I'm not a welder. I did half a day course learning to arc weld, as you see I'm doing here. For anyone interested, I'm using a Artec ProArc 135 welding machine with some 2.4mm 6013 electrodes, and I'm running it at 65 amps. I've probably already said it in the voiceover, but I'll say it again. Clearly, I'm not a welder. I'm just someone who likes making things and has some ability to stick metal together, albeit in a pretty ugly way, but I'm going to hit them with a grinder. It's all going to be painted, and yeah, they'll be fine. I'm using an 80 grit flat disc in my angle grinder, just removing any excess material and getting the welds looking as nice as I can. This is awesome. The next job is to start cutting out the mesh that's going to sit within these frames to hold the shoes. I've got a big sheet of steel mesh. Hopefully I bought enough. I'm going to grab the angle grinder, start measuring, start cutting, and find a way to weld that mesh inside of these frames. I'm just using a spare piece of angle iron as a guide to run my angle grinder against to make sure I get a nice straight cut. As you can see, I'm wearing gloves when handling this because it is like handling razor blades. It's super sharp. Now, there are some things you don't want to cut when you're working with material like this, and there are some things you really don't want to cut when you're working with material like this. So I just went and put an apron on as another layer of protection as I cut the rest of this steel mesh down to size. First piece of mesh cut down, I'm just going to place it in the frame now just to make sure it fits. I'm not sure I've got enough overlap on the mesh and the frame to actually get a good quality weld to hold it in place. So what I might end up doing is cutting down some of this steel bar and just put a support piece in every 200mm along the length of each of the shelves. I'll get the rest of them cut and then figure it out. I've got all the mesh cut to size and sat inside the frames. I'm going to take them over to the welding table now and start tacking them into place. Well, that didn't go to plan. I was hoping to be able to just tack those into place, but I just ended up burning through the steel mesh before I was able to weld it to the frame. It looks a right mess. I'm going to start cutting those steel support pieces down and just sandwich the mesh into place. I've got all the support bars cut down now. I spaced them 300-ish mil apart just so I can cut down on the amount of material I need. So now I'm going to start welding these into place and hope that it goes better than tacking the mesh to the frame. I've welded up the first frame with the support pieces underneath and it's still not going to plan. There's a bit of give when you press down, especially on this side. I know it's only for shoes, but the last thing I want is for someone to reach underneath and cut their hand, or my cat to cut itself on the underside if these are weighed down a bit. But I think I have an idea. So this is one where I haven't welded these support pieces in yet, but I could get some more steel, weld it in this way all the way around, and that would give it support in both directions. So I've just had a quick look online and I found this 20mm steel bar 1 meter long, and they have them at my local Wickes. So I think I'm going to jump in the car and head down there now to see if they have enough for what I need. I've just cut down all the new steel I bought and put it into place between the existing supports. I'm hoping this will do. I'm going to weld it in now and we'll see how it comes out. So I've just finished welding out all of the shelves. They're a lot sturdier than they were. I'm really happy with how they come out, and the extra support piece is covering up any of that exposed mesh that was really sharp, so no chance of getting cut by touching that, which is great. The next job is to start working out how I'm going to attach these shelves to the legs and getting them put together. These are those two flat bar support pieces that I cut earlier. I've tacked them together so I can drill both of them at the same time without them moving about. I'm starting out with a 4mm drill bit, moving up to a 8mm drill bit, and then finishing off with a 10mm drill bit. This will allow the bolts to move around should the wood contract or expand during the different seasons. And now I'm grinding down those welds on my oscillating belt sander so I can separate the two leg supports. I've got one of the leg assemblies laid out on my fixture table, and now I can start tacking them together and then welding the whole leg assembly out. Once I've got one of the sets of legs assembled and welded out, I move on to the next one using the same process. So now the legs are welded together, I thought I'd mock it up quickly just to get an idea of the size of it, and I'm really happy with how it's coming out so far. I've got the bottom shelf just sat on my workbench. The other two shelves I'm planning to put in at a slight angle, like this kind of idea. So I need to work out a way of fixing them in. What I'm thinking at the moment is to use some of the 50mm flat bar and attach the shelves to them and then weld them in once they're done, but we'll see how we go with that. But that can all wait till tomorrow because I'm knackered. I'm gonna go and put my feet up and have a cup of tea. I've come up with a plan to weld the shelves to the legs. So I've cut down a load of 50mm flat bar. I'm going to weld the shelves with this around 6-degree angle onto the flat bar, and then I can weld the flat bar onto the legs. So yeah, over to the welding table again. After I finished with that welding, I went back with the same 80 grit flap disc and started cleaning up the shelves and the legs. Once I got that all cleaned up, I could start welding the first shelf to the leg assembly and begin the process of welding out all the individual components into the final project. This shoe rack's now got too big to work on my fixture table, so as you can see I'm having to actually put the workpiece clamp directly on the shoe rack itself rather than on the table. I'm finishing off the bottom shelf by cutting off any overhanging pieces of metal and then grinding it down so it's not sharp. The bottom shelf's now welded into place. I was just about to start working on the second shelf when I realised this is going to be really tough to paint once it's all welded together. I'm not spraying it, I'm not going to send it off for powder coating. I'm going to use a brush and some Hammerite paint, and that's just going to be a pain to do, especially on the underside of everything. So I'm going to start painting the areas that are going to be tough to get to now, finish the welding later, and then give it a final coat everywhere when it's done. I painted all the areas that are going to be quite hard to get to when this is fully welded together. I gave up with the brush after a while and picked up this little roller from B&Q. It made it like a million times easier, so I was quite happy with that. I've also chucked in the middle shelf. I've got it held up with this clamp at the moment so I can weld that in place. Once I've got the middle shelf welded in, I can start measuring out where I'm going to put the top shelf and then get what I think will be all of the welding finished, and we can go back to doing some woodwork. So on to the last little bit of welding, just getting the second and the third shelves installed. And moving on to a final bit of grinding, just to get everything looking as nice as possible, get rid of any ugly welds or any sharp corners. I've got all 3 shelves welded in place now and ground everything down. So the next job is to do some painting and finish that off. But as I put it on my workbench, I noticed it was not sitting level anymore. I think it's something to do with putting too much heat into it as I was welding it. So I've got these 2 big clamps pulling it back into square, and I've also put a little offset on this back corner to try and give it a bit more leverage as it's pulling it back into square. I don't know if it's going to work. If it doesn't, I don't really care, in all honesty. It wasn't too bad, I just thought I'd give it a go. But yeah, finish off the painting and then continue with the woodwork, get the top on, and we'll be done. And this is where we are after the first full coat of paint, and you can see here that pulling it back into square worked. There's only a little bit of movement now. It's going to be sat on carpet, so that's absolutely fine. And now we're back to working on the wooden top. I'm just running it through my thickness planer just to smooth out both sides. This leaves a really nice finish, close to what you'd get by sanding at 120 grit. There's a small amount of snipe, but nothing that can't be taken down by the sander. I'm putting some light pencil marks down so I can track where I'm sanding, and again I'm using some 120 grit Xtract Cubitron 2 sanding discs from 3M. I'm sanding out any marks now left by the chisel and the angle grinder on the live edge. As you see, I've got 2 of those foam sanding pads on, which just help it contour to the shape of what you're sanding. I'm using a 3mm roundover bit just to put a roundover on both edges, top and bottom of either side, before finishing with some hand sanding. Now is time to line up the top and the base of the shoe rack. If it looked like I was struggling to lift that steel base onto my workbench and move it around on the top, it's because I was. This has got really heavy. I'm using my combination square here to line up the top of the base just to make sure everything looks nice and centered. Once I'm happy with the position of everything, I mark out where I want to drill the holes for the threaded inserts so I can bolt the base to the top. For this I'm using a 10mm wood drill bit. I've set my depth stop at 15mm just so I don't blow through the top of the wood. Once I've got the holes drilled, I use a countersink to clean anything up and then apply a little bit of glue before putting each threaded insert in place. And then I can begin the final sanding starting at 180 grit. Now I've got the top sanded up to 240 grit. It's time to start prepping for the finish. To begin with, I'm just going to use a bit of white spirit to wipe down all the surfaces. That's going to pick up any loose sawdust. It also gives you a bit of a preview of what the wood's going to look like when it's finished, and it just gets it nice and clean. So put some gloves on and get that going. After wiping down the bottom, I'm installing the bolts into the threaded inserts and flipping it over. This just means that the bottom's not sat directly on the workbench and the white spirit can flash off a lot easier as it's got some airflow getting to it. I'm using Rubio Monocoat to finish this project. It's a really hard wearing finish that leaves a really nice satin sheen, and it couldn't be easier to apply. As always, I start by spreading it with a plastic spreader and then using a white buffing pad on my sander to buff it in. Once I've buffed it in and left it for a couple of minutes, I wipe off any excess with a couple of lint-free rags. So I've not worked on this project for the last 3 or 4 weeks. I only really get the weekends, and I've been busy, and I've just got over a cold, and now it's 3 days before Christmas, and I just want to get this finished and in the house. I'm not quite happy with the finish I've got on the wooden top. I've already put the Rubio Monocoat down, as you've seen, but for some projects, to give it a bit more protection, I like to put down a second coat, which we're going to do on this one. So all I've got here is a maroon pad that I've cut down into a circle to fit on my sander. I'm going to give that a light pass, clean it all down, and apply the second coat of Rubio. Again, I'm starting the finishing process with some white spirit to remove any of the loose material that came up from using the maroon pad on it. Then applying the Rubio Monocoat, spreading it out with a plastic spreader, using the buffing pad on my sander, and then wiping off the excess. You might remember earlier when I said this. I'm not spraying it, I'm not going to send it off for powder coating. I'm going to use a brush and some Hammerite paint, specifically this part. I'm not spraying it. Yeah, I'm spraying it. After leaving the paint and the finish a couple of days to cure in the garage, it's time to install the shoe rack. So I moved the base into place, bolted the top down, and got everything put away. I'm really happy with how this project came out. I think it fits nicely with the other furniture that's in the entryway to my house. It means that I don't fall over shoes every time I go to open the front door, and most importantly, my wife's happy because everything's nice and tidy. Thanks for sticking around and watching the video. If you like content like this, hit the subscribe button, and I'll catch you in the next one.